Welcome everyone to the Demystifying AI for Nonprofit Organizations webinar today. We have a wonderful guest speaker who I'm going to be introducing in a couple of minutes. But I do want to say a couple things. First is that we have over 500 people registered for this session today. That's a wow. So good to have so many of you with us this morning. My name is Scott Vaughn. I'm the host for today's session on behalf of the Community Development Unit of Alberta Arts, Culture, and Status of Women. And working behind the scenes with me doing tech support is Shanna Shawtoozy. I would like to take a moment right now to recognize that we all recognize that we're on the traditional and ancestral homeland of many diverse people of Alberta, the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose ancestors have walked and stewarded this land since time immemorial. We recognize our role as settlers on this land, and we're grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory. We're located all across Alberta, acknowledge the land of many peoples, presently subject to Treaty 6, 7, and 8. This includes the Métis districts throughout Alberta. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude. The goal of all of our webinars, I know that I see many of you that are back with us today have been part of these sessions before, and if you're new, that's great to have you here. All of our webinars are for board members of nonprofit organizations, so you have the knowledge, skills, and tools to be successful in your work. On the screen, you can see the board development program series of webinars that we offer. There's also other sessions this spring we're offering that are starred below. And you can see the Demystifying Artificial Intelligence, AI for Nonprofit session today as part of that. You can find the details for all of the sessions on the slide and to register for them through our registration link, which we'll put in the chat box again right away. And I just also want to point out that we're recording today's session, and the video will be posted to the Alberta Nonprofit Learning Center in the next few days. And Shanna is going to put into the link into all those resources right away too. Okay, let's take a look at another area we do want to talk about. I also want to mention that there's going to be an in-person event coming for community board members and nonprofit leaders in the province being hosted in Calgary on Saturday, May 24th. That's Board Leadership Calgary 2025. As you can see on the slide, there'll be topics related to board governance basics, fundraising, volunteerism, innovation, and marketing. You have to act fast if you want to get the early bird pricing because it ends on May 1st. So definitely recommend you click on that link and be able to get a part of Board Leadership Calgary that is coming up really, really soon. And we'll make sure we get the link in for that right away. As I mentioned before, we're with the Community Development Unit of Alberta Arts, Culture, and Status of Women. Our unit provides support for nonprofit and community organizations, as well as public sector organizations in Alberta in various areas. If you need more information about our services, you can go to our website or give us a call or send us an email for more information on all of that. And we'll get, again, all the different ways you can get a hold of us. You can see in the chat box now. Thank you, Shannas. We're also using automatic live captions for this session. So if you want to enable it, please hover your mouse over the bottom part of the screen, then click on the closed caption button that you see there. And then you can change the size of the captions by small or large by using that slider. It's also, so that's the main things we wanted to say on that. Also, we'll be using the chat box feature for the session today, especially for our Q&A segment near the end of the session. Please keep in mind that it is a public chat box intended for obtaining your feedback, presenting information, teaching, and learning. So keep that in mind when you're providing your thoughts and comments. We also have a toolkit with additional resources for today's sessions, and we'll put that link back in the chat box again as well. One of the things we did want to let you know is that there's not a slide deck available for the session, as all the information contained on the slides are part of resources that are in the toolkit. So you can just click on that toolkit. You'll have everything you could possibly need from the session today. So hopefully that's helpful. Keep that and you're aware of that. And finally, we want to make sure that the information is not intended to constitute legal advice. We simply, and our presenter wants to share with you information that we all think will be helpful as we navigate our organizations through its operations, understanding AI. So for your own organization specific situations or questions related to the material, you might need to seek advice from a professional in the related area. So I'm now very excited on behalf of the Community Development Unit to introduce our session, Demystifying AI, Artificial Intelligence for Nonprofit Organizations. The succession today with our guest speaker is about what artificial intelligence is and how it's used, as well as how it can be used for governance and risk management considerations for AI adoption in nonprofit volunteer sector organizations. Our presenter today will also address some common myths and misconceptions about AI and provide you with a list of resources on where to learn more about this topic. And I think that's the toolkit comes into play there. The presentation is not designed as a technical deep dive and does not include legal insurance or cybersecurity advice. So please be aware of that. So to help us navigate the topics and to share her experiences, we have Amanda Henry with us today presenting Demystifying AI for Nonprofit Organizations. A little bit about Amanda. As you can see, she's on the screen, but also you can see her in the also right with us you can picture it above on the screen. Uh, Amanda is a strategist at Y Stations Communication and Research, an Alberta-based strategy and research company. With over 2 decades of experience in Alberta's nonprofit, post-secondary, and government sectors, she's exceptionally familiar with Alberta's public and nonprofit sectors. She's advised cabinet ministers, post-secondary vice presidents, and volunteer-led community organizations. Amanda's work focuses on helping organizations weave together strategy, engagement, good governance, and technology to achieve impact. Supporting organizations' leaders with understanding and navigating the implications of responsible AI for public organizations is a focus of her practice. Amanda is a lifelong community volunteer and is a recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal for her contributions to Alberta in the field of public services. So join me and having very, very pleased to have Amanda with us this morning, a wonderful, knowledgeable guest speaker, done a lot of research and work on the topic, and will help us demystify AI and share us what we need to know working in the nonprofit sector related to AI. Before I turn it over to Amanda, I do want to mention that we will have a Q&A time segment with Amanda around 11:10ish this morning. So if you can save your questions until that time, that would be great. Now, if your question is related to some simple clarification of information that is being presented, perhaps getting clarification maybe on a term Amanda is using during the presentation, or your question is a technical problem, like maybe you're unable to access the resources or links we're providing, then by all means, put your question in the chat box right away. Otherwise, keep in mind, there will be that 15-minute Q&A segment near the end of this morning that Amanda will try to answer all of your questions. So without further ado, I'm very, very privileged to turn it over to you, Amanda, for take us from here. All yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. And thanks everyone on the call for joining us today. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to have a chat with you and go through some of the resources. Before we dive in, I wanted to touch on the goals for this session and a couple of housekeeping items. The first housekeeping item is that it is allergy season. So bear with me while I try to keep that under control with water. And if I have to mute my microphone so that you don't all have to hear me sneeze, I apologize in advance. I want to talk a little bit about session goals. We are here to talk about artificial intelligence and how it's impacting nonprofits and the organizations in the public sector. Mostly focused on nonprofits, but I'm sure there'll be lessons for folks from other public sector organizations as well. I'm providing a little bit of a primer on what AI is and how it's being used. We're going to work on increasing everyone's comfort level with navigating AI specific to your role as a leader in a Canadian public sector organization. Talk a little bit about governance and risk management for organizations assessing their use of AI, and share some resources as have already been posted in the chat. My view on this topic and what this session is sort of based around is what's called responsible AI. I'll get into this idea a bit more in the presentation, but the basic point is that I recommend taking an intentional, values-driven approach to whether and how organizations adopt AI. A little bit of a legal disclaimer. Scott's already talked about this, but just for my own good habits, I am not a data scientist or an AI developer, so I can't provide detailed technical information about how AI is developed. What I am good at is organizational strategy, governance, and risk management topics. Not a cybersecurity expert, so we're not going to be talking about technical solutions or audit approaches, and I'm not providing legal or insurance advice. So I also want to note that this informational session is on a rapidly evolving technology. So we're going to do our best to stay current, but as ever, consult the experts, especially as things are continuing to change in the field. I'm going to be referring to specific AI services and apps throughout the presentation. I'm not endorsing or promoting any of these products. They're examples being used for illustrative purposes. The toolkit does include links to apps that I used or mentioned in this presentation if you want to look at them to learn more. And please always consult experts if you need to provide answers that are customized to your organizational context. Last disclaimer before we dive in, I want to note that AI was used to assist with the development of this presentation. The advice I'm giving is mine, but some of the content and visual aids are AI generated, and I'll touch on which is which as we go along. I want to start with this disclaimer because I think that transparency is an important part of responsible AI adoption, so that's why I'm acknowledging it right now. With that, let's get into it. First, I would like to start us off with a poll just to get a sense of what your perceptions of AI are. And the question is just, what is AI? Thanks, Scott, for launching that poll. If folks want to take a second to read over the options and provide their answers, jump in there, please. So the multiple choice options I've offered are a highly advanced system that can think, feel emotions, and make independent decisions just like a human. B, a set of technologies that allow machines to analyze data, recognize patterns, and make predictions, which can be used to automate tasks. C, a computer program that always knows the right answer and never makes mistakes. Or D, a system that mimics human intelligence by replicating the human brain structure and functioning. Thanks, everyone, for being quick in the poll. I appreciate that, especially with so much text. If you have comments you want to post in the chat as we go along, also feel free. Just going to give it a few more minutes so that folks can have a little bit of a think and provide their answer. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating there. I think we're going to close the poll and show the results. Thanks, Scott. Great work, everyone. That is correct. B is the most correct answer. Reason being that AI, at least at our current level of technology, can't feel or make independent decisions, though some do a pretty good job of imitating that behavior. AI definitely makes mistakes, which we'll talk about. And while AI does mimic human intelligence, it isn't by replicating the human brain. It's still computer programming. So thank you. Given that everyone is really familiar with this topic, we're going to quickly just jump through some definitions, but I want to make sure that everyone has the same kind of operating definition as we go forward. So what is AI according to AI? I thought it would be just fun to ask ChatGPT what it thinks it is. And I also asked Siri, which is an Apple product that uses AI. And this is what they came up with. I'm not going to read out the whole slide, but the basic gist is that AI is a computer system that mimics human intelligence for specific tasks. This is a human-generated definition from the Government of Canada. AI is information technology that performs tasks that would normally require biological brain power to accomplish, such as making sense of spoken language, also known as natural language processing, learning behaviors, or solving problems without specific programmed instructions. How AI is different than conventional software is that instead of being software that executes a program, AI is given rules and data to be trained on, and then it figures out a response based on what it knows. There are 7 kinds of AI according to current theories. Reactive machines, limited memory machines, and narrow artificial intelligence exist in the real world now. There are 4 other kinds of AI: general AI, theory of the mind AI, self-aware AI, and super AI. These are currently the stuff of science fiction. They are types of AI that are as good or better than humans at reasoning. Right now, just theoretical. For today, we're going to focus on narrow artificial intelligence, which is AI that has human-like capabilities to learn from inputs, generate solutions based on what it's learned so far, and learn from new data. It's narrow because this learning focuses on specific tasks, not on like general abilities. So an example I like to use is that ChatGPT, which is a common generative AI platform that folks are tapping into right now. It can do all kinds of things with text and images and video, but it can't cook, can't play sports, and it doesn't really do things outside of what it's been trained to do around generating text, images, and video. Why all the buzz lately? Specifically, generative AI is what we're sort of been hearing about over the last 2 years. And generative AI, as I kind of mentioned just now, generates text, image, videos, and other media. It can imitate a person's ability to create new material based on information that it's learning from. The other reason that this technology has really kind of washed over us lately is that it's being deployed in a way that makes it possible for regular people to get AI to do things through natural language prompts. So you can just send it messages, or some systems will let you just talk to them as you would a person. And you don't have to know any programming to get it to respond to what you want it to do. This has massively democratized access to AI. It also came online really fast. One of the metrics that industry people track when it comes to the adoption of new technologies is how long it takes an application to get to 100 million users. Usually this graph is in months. So, 78 months for Google Translate, 30 months for Instagram. So usually we measure how long a technology takes to penetrate 100 million users in years. ChatGPT, the generative AI chatbot that kickstarted our current conversations about AI, took 2 months to get to 100 million users between November and basically January of 2020, November of 2022 and January of 2023. So this means that the normal adoption curve we see with new technologies, where young people and companies get a bit of a few months head start to figure out how the technology works, what use cases are going to make sense, and then spread that knowledge gradually through the public and through institutions, just didn't have time to happen. People are accessing the technology themselves, and institutions are experiencing this technology at the same time as early adopters are looking at it to see how it works. So, if it feels like AI came out of the blue in the last couple of years, that's because it kind of did. Just a quick example I think, to demonstrate what I'm talking about in terms of traditional software versus AI. I think if you think about Microsoft Excel, uh, let the nightmare wash over you. Every time you use the sum command in Microsoft Excel, assuming you used it correctly, it will add up numbers for you. So I've sort of done an illustrated version on the screen. I know this isn't actually how you use Excel, but just so that it was easy to show. If you ask it to sum 4 and 4, or if cell E2 and F2 had a 4 and a 4 in it, and you just summed them, you'll get 8. Um, the other thing to think about, and you'll get 8 every time. Uh, the other thing to think about with Excel is that if you type it in incorrectly, you end up with an error that you have to correct manually. ChatGPT, on the other hand, I asked ChatGPT for all of the ways that it could respond to sum 4 plus 4. For eagle-eyed Excel experts, you'll actually notice that the formula I gave it is wrong. It still figured out what I wanted, and added up the numbers. But it also spit out about 6 other ways it could answer the prompt, give me the sum of 4 plus 4. So this one is just the answer. It also gave me a humorous or playful one with a pun in it. Something tells me that the answer is 8, and it gave itself an emoji. It also sassed me. Sorry, excuse me. In one of its answers, it told me that using the formula this way was a bit like using a cargo plane to deliver a sandwich, and it tried to coach me on a more correct way to use Excel. Uh, Scott, could we have the next poll, please? as we summarize narrative generative AI. I just want to get a sense. Are you using AI now? That poll is up, so please feel free to answer. Uh, Great. Folks are populating it really quick. I appreciate that. All right, let's close that poll and share the results, please. About 80% of people, 82% of people said yes, and about 15% of people said no. That's about the same as that's actually a pretty accurate representation of where AI has penetrated so far. I will say you may be using AI and not know it. Even before this explosion with ChatGPT, other kinds of AI show up in a lot of programs that we use every day. So email spam filters are my favorite, the one that have made my life better. That's not generative AI yet, but it is a kind of AI that helps keep spam out of your inbox. A couple of other examples of programs. If you're using Duolingo, that's an AI-based program, and it's been introducing generative AI. If you use facial ID to unlock your phone, that's AI. So it's kind of showing up in a lot of places. In a 2023 consumer survey, Pegasystems found that 33% of consumers think they are using AI, while 77% are actually using AI. So, unsurprisingly, the group that we have today is a little bit more familiar with the technology and has that sense, but I just thought that was an interesting statistic to share. One other thing that's happening, especially with generative AI, is that companies are starting to add it to their service offerings, but with mixed results. So the image in 2024, McDonald's in the US tried to automate drive-through windows with AI agents. So instead of talking to a person to order your meal, you'd be connected with an automated assistant. It went poorly. There are a number of funny or stressful, depending on how you roll, videos on social media. My favorite one is a person who tried to order chicken nuggets and couldn't get the AI to stop adding chicken nuggets to their order. So by the end of trying to talk to this AI, when he gave up and stopped the video, he had over 260 chicken nuggets on his order. That's the AI photo that I've got up here. Uh, you don't have that problem with human staff because a person knows that 260 nuggets is too many and would probably try to sell you two boxes of six nuggets instead of 260. Both the images on the slides right now are AI generated. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can tell. And if anybody's got like a tip on how you can tell that these are AI generated, please feel free to post it in the chat. My favorite of the like hints that this a human didn't illustrate this is that one of the boxes in the human image has five written on the side, even though there are clearly six nuggets in the box. And I specifically told the AI to generate a box of six chicken nuggets. I'd like to do a quick round of true or false. We'll just get folks to post true or false in the chat if you want to play along. Uh, let's see what some of the common myths and misconceptions are out there about AI. First one, AI is a brand new technology. True or false? Yeah, false, false. Yeah, thank you, everyone. False is correct. Uh, it is AI. If anyone saw The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch, that movie was about Alan Turing, a historical figure who laid the foundations for what would come to be known as artificial intelligence as far back as 1950. AI has existed in labs for decades and even in consumer applications going back, a couple of decades now. Generative AI is pretty new, and the general public being able to interface through large language model powered AI is quite new. But yeah, we've had AI in and around for a long time now. Next question. AI is completely unregulated in Canada. True or false? All right, getting some mixed answers, a couple trues, couple falses. Yeah, this one's a little bit, everyone knew that AI had been around for a while, but let's talk a little bit about unregulated. A little bit of a trick question. AI is not well regulated in Canada, but it is regulated. Canada has adopted AI-specific legislation, including the Digital Charter Implementation Act, the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. I didn't link these directly in the toolkit, but there is like a Canadian government resource, and you can find these pieces of legislation from that if you'd like to. Canada was one of the first countries to come out with a national AI strategy. There's also, for those of you who are familiar with ISO certified international certification standards, very recently an ISO standard came out for the management of AI systems 42001. So regulations are starting. Uh, they are not keeping up, but there's some movement on that. I would say that the Canadian government moved a lot faster on AI than it did on social media, which is promising, but still more work to do. The other thing I want to stress is that although AI specific rules are still lagging, pretty new, not quite up to snuff, all of the other laws and regulations that nonprofits have always had to think about still apply when you're using AI. So the Canadian anti-spam legislation, CASL, FOIP and PIPEDA, privacy legislation, those kinds of things. You still have to think about those things in the context of AI even if the developers aren't, which I know is a frustrating challenge, but just to keep in mind. Last true or false question. AI can make mistakes. Awesome. People are smart and have been paying attention because I think I already dropped the answer to this earlier in the presentation. Generative AI creates new content based on its training and the data it has been given to learn from. So, as the old saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. Yeah, thanks, Karen, in the chat, hallucinations. Um, so, two things that are going on here. AI makes all kinds of mistakes. If there's errors in its training data, it will replicate those errors. It sometimes replicates errors in user prompts. So if you make a mistake when you're asking it to do something, it will repeat that mistake back to you. Sometimes it fact checks you, but not always. And it also hallucinates, which is makes up information that sounds like a fact, but it's actually just a pattern that it's producing. People have already gotten in a lot of trouble by relying on hallucinated data. One of my favorites to point to is that AI loves to hallucinate court cases that never happened because any AI that's been trained on case files scans the database and then comes up with a new thing that matches the pattern that isn't always a fact. Um, Now the tools are getting better every day and they're starting to tune things so that you can specifically tell it facts only, please. But even so, I am aware of two cases where lawyers were held in contempt of court and faced professional conduct complaints to their regulator because they handed in hallucinated documents written by AI as part of a court submission. Consumer watchdogs are keeping a really close eye on hallucinations and big generative AI tools like Google Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT. Some of these tools hallucinate as much as a quarter or 25% of the time. I just want to jump back quickly to a comment in the chat about AI being regulated in Canada. AI is regulated in Canada. It's just not well regulated. So is is AI completely unregulated? It's false. Hope that clarifies, but we can get it in the Q&A if we still need to go into that. Happy to do it. All right. Thank you everyone for playing along as we kind of got into what the technology is. Now let's talk about it in the context of where it's showing up for nonprofits and what the use cases and risks look like. As I've kind of mentioned, lots of software we already use is starting to deploy AI-powered features. I'm not going to run through this whole list, but you'll see it in Google, you'll see it in Microsoft. Uh, you're hearing about it in new tools. There's apps coming online all the time. Um, and one of the most interesting tools that I think is coming online for nonprofits is AI powered tools like closed captioning or translation services. So anyone who's got closed captioning enabled in this meeting, that's an AI generated tool. You're also seeing it on back end things like changing how social media platforms target advertising. Algorithms have always been AI generated, but we're starting to see generative AI deployed in those. And we're also seeing it in all kinds of private and like specialized contexts. So AI is being used for things like tumor identification in cancer patients, um, powering chatbots for big companies, simulating the stock market for financial institutions to study and predict market volatility. I'm trying to focus this presentation on things that are going to be more common for nonprofits to help illustrate what the technology can do and what to be worried about. Let's start by talking briefly about where we are seeing AI-powered accessibility tools. Uh, Many organizations are renewing a focus on providing inclusive and accessible events and services. So I know from my own time working in Alberta's nonprofit sector that access to translation services, multilingual staff, supports like Braille and American Sign Language are crucially important, but can be difficult to incorporate consistently, sometimes due to cost, sometimes due to the availability of expertise. So tools like Google Translate allow frontline staff to interact with people that they do not share a language with in real time. I've had the privilege of having some conversations with people who through Google Translate, and it's interesting what the limitations are, but it's a really powerful experience to be able to talk to someone and just have that breakthrough of understanding, even if it is supported by technology. As you know, we've noted closed captioning on virtual programming has become much more common with the rise of AI. And it's also possible to use it to sort of cover off last minute needs. However, as I'm sure most of you know, the AI tools that exist are not perfect. They make mistakes, sometimes really bad ones. And while it can be kind of an okay fix in the something is better than nothing type of situation, there are times where using these tools might be even more of a reputational risk for your organization than not using them at all. So, example, if someone comes into your office and wants information about where to find services and they're experiencing a language barrier with the front desk, using Google Translate or a similar tool might be a great way to overcome that language barrier in the moment to help connect them to a service provider who can help them. But your annual conference that members pay to attend might be a little bit more of a high risk situation for relying on those tools instead of paying for expertise. Uh, so I just summarized some of those risks and opportunities on this slide. It's an extremely cost-effective tool to support greater inclusion. It addresses gaps you may not be able to hire for, and it can be applied last minute. But the tools are cost-effective, but don't always make high-quality results. And doing inclusion poorly can be risky. Something is better and then nothing is not always welcome. Wanted to just touch on a quick example to demonstrate what I'm talking about. This is a limerick written by a human that I dictated into a free AI-powered transcription service. And now, admittedly, I was probably talking fairly quickly, but the real limerick is, there was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. Two owls and a hen, four larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." Otter AI, which is a free, you can access, it's got free and paid versions, but I just did this in the free version where I hadn't taught the AI anything. I just opened it up and asked it. You can see it kind of got the gist of the limerick. There was an old man, beard, who said, "It is just as I feared. Two owls and a hem," hem doesn't make any sense, and then it goes real off the rails here, "four lakes and a ran have all built their nest in my beard." I don't know how a lake builds a nest or what it would look like in a beard. Um, but this is, you see what I mean, where it's not quite right, and it makes mistakes that a human would know are nonsense, but the AI doesn't. Um, Another example of ways these tools might be used by nonprofits uh, is process optimization, or as I like to say, AI in the background. I think this might be so accessibility is a powerful high risk, high reward sort of way to look at AI. And as the technology improves, I think that that could make a real impact. Right now, process optimization is where a lot of private sector providers are focusing on providing resources and trying to create products to bring to market to help people. And I think that this will be a really interesting thing to watch as it rolls out in governments and in organizations. AI tools can be used to automate things like calendar invites, email inbox management, customer relations or CRM software, project management tools. Um, there's a tool that I haven't used, like caveat, I have not used it at all, but I thought it was interesting as I was researching this presentation called Grantable. And there's a link to Grantable in the toolkit, which uses AI to automate some aspects of researching grants and applying for funding. I don't think I'm alone in saying that grant applications are some people's least favorite things to do in their work, but deeply important because of how funding for the work that you do works. Um, so somebody's trying to help nonprofits streamline that. I suspect there's some funders on the call who may have some concerns about that. Happy to take the questions, but these are the kinds of things that we're starting to see around tools to try and make life easier, to make life more efficient, to take boring and repetitive tasks off the plates of volunteers and administrative staff so that they can focus on impact-driven things and just get more done in the context of smaller resource-constrained teams. We are also seeing some examples of people trying to replace workforces with automated workflows. Whether or not that makes sense in your organization is up to you, but I would strongly encourage to make those decisions around your organizational values and be really, really thoughtful about the technology if you're heading that way, just because of where it's at and the fact and what it is actually capable of doing. AI doesn't have human judgment in the same way that an employee does. So then I use some of this in my own day-to-day work around process optimization, but I also like breathe down the AI shoulder to make sure it doesn't make mistakes or that I can correct the mistakes because that's a big risk. AI is more of a summer student than an expert. It takes skill to supervise AI, and whether or not you have access to the backend so you can prompt and train it is an interesting question. The other couple of things about AI is depending on what you want to use it for, depending on how powerful the tool is, data quality is really, really important. AI learns on patterns. So if your data isn't organized in a way that it can easily recognize where the patterns that it matters are, it's not necessarily going to be a cheap or simple solution to implement, even for something simple. Um, I don't know about you, but if your inbox is as chaotic as mine, like just giving it to AI and saying, hey, file this for me isn't going to work. Off the front end, there's some work you have to do. The other thing is that there's the explosion of tools is mind-boggling. There's lots of free tools. The limitations on free tools we'll get into in a bit around some of the risks that you run in using them and some of the customization options. There's subscription tools, which are in many ways the most mixed bag. And then there's proprietary or custom tools. These are the tools where you have the most control over what the AI is trained to do and what you can, like what control you have over in data and stuff. But those tools are outrageously expensive because they involve working with data scientists to have some custom training done. So whether and how you do process optimization is still a little bit up in the air, still a little bit of a evolving field. Another place where we're seeing AI in nonprofit applications is in ideation or brainstorming, if you don't want to use the big word, which is fair. I sometimes have a really hard time starting written work with a blank page, where you write the first sentence a couple of times and back it up because you just can't kind of get moving. So I freely admit that sometimes I will work with a large language model like Gemini or ChatGPT to ask it for some ideas. And then I use those ideas as a jumping off point. I still write whatever I'm working on myself. I don't cut and paste the text and I don't just like wholesale rip off the AI. But sometimes AI comes up with a neat idea for me to riff off of that I wouldn't have gotten to myself or that would have taken more time. This works because AI has literally read millions of pieces of data. So it comes up with a pattern that's outside of my experience. However, it's based on the experience of others. AI is not creative. It feels like it is sometimes, and it can help you be creative, but all it's doing is giving you a pattern based on what you asked it for. Um, I think if you use it, and if anybody has been using it and has observations, please feel free to share in the chat. Um, AI has this really generic voice and a pretty specific stylistic approach to writing. It really likes lists. It really likes short sentences. And it uses certain words like delve and synthesize way more than a human would. So you have to be really careful that its lazy writing doesn't become your lazy writing. As we've already talked about, it also hallucinates, so be careful about that. I would also add that in the ideation phase, the benefits are like sort of jump-starting that creative process, but the risks are if you really like something that AI came up with, you might not read it as critically as you would as you need to catch mistakes. The other two risks I will touch on is there's a lot of controversy around AI and intellectual property. I suspect some of you have been waiting for me to raise this issue. And AI, how AI is trained is varies depending on the developer, and not all developers are being transparent about what they've been doing. So one of the things you need to think about in the organizations that you work in is whether the AI itself, like how it was trained, it aligns with your values. There's lots of controversies, especially in artistic and creative communities, about whether any of the AI models are ethical, given that AI developers are generally not that transparent about how they put together their training data and what it is. There's some evidence to suggest that big models use data that they scraped off the internet, which includes copyrighted material and the intellectual property, without the consent or without compensating creators. So if you're riffing on AI generated ideas, there's a risk that you are riffing on copyrighted material. That said, if you don't cut and paste, if you still write it yourself, if you do a little bit of research and fact checking, as you probably would if you were doing your own writing, you can mitigate this risk to an extent. It's important to be aware of, and it's important to understand the conversations that need to happen internally about how your values align with that set of concerns. Um, you also need to be careful about professional integrity and attribution. As a rule, I advise that if you're going to use AI, you should be comfortable disclosing that you used AI, which is a good segue into risks. So, if those are sort of the top three use cases where it might make sense in a relatively low stakes way for nonprofits to be looking at AI, let's talk about problems. First problem, privacy. In general, AI does not meet the same privacy guarantees as traditional software, and even traditional software has its problems around how data is used and shared publicly. Once data is in an AI model, it's difficult to delete it. And in some models, it might even be impossible. It depends a little bit on how they're trained. Um, Once AI has data, it can be difficult to track kind of where it's gone. And something to keep in mind is unless you've been like really on the spot or have really permissive FOIP permissions, data that you've collected that's personally identifiable or has third-party business interests attached to it. So under the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, you probably don't have the permission set you need to put that data in AI. So be really thoughtful about that. It's not confidential in the way that a Word document is. Um, I note here that ChatGPT's default setting is allow your content to be used to train the model. So you have to go find and manually turn that off. There are ways to have privacy compliant AI models, but they tend to be expensive. Um, this is changing a bit as developers move to meet market demand. We're seeing it in our field around market research and confidentiality. My company does a lot of surveys, and we've been really careful about AI tools because we don't want to be collecting personal information from people on the guarantee of anonymity and then not being able to preserve that anonymity because we asked AI to help us analyze it. But developers are starting to recognize that that's a need. I just want to stress that they're starting to. So be thoughtful and careful about privacy issues, as always. Another concern is cybersecurity and data security. Um, AI doesn't inherently understand or apply security risk management in the same way a human does. Some AI have guardrails and training, and if you ask it like a straight up evil question, it will typically tell you, no, I can't answer that. But determined bad actors can get it to tell things that they shouldn't, the same way that determined bad actors fish humans. AI is also being used by hackers and scammers. Um, so, like, I'm not going to get into all of the ways that they can do this, but know that AI's ability to impersonate or deepfake a person is getting better and better every day. AI also makes it really easy to create and automate disinformation, sometimes by accident. It's also possible to poison AI models by feeding them bad data. There's an article in the resources from the MIT Technology Review that goes into what poisoning can look like in a bit more detail. Um, but just, be advised that as new technology comes online, new security risks come online. Something that's important to note, AI is capable of bias. It's not unbiased or objective. It can be, but only if it's trained to be. And it's difficult to train AI to be unbiased because of the unconscious bias of humans as much as anything else. So, if you were kind of paying attention to the news in the early days of these things coming online, there were troubling stories about discriminatory text that the big language models would generate. I've included some links to articles about some interesting and troubling ethical dilemmas that AI is raising. The articles are a little bit technical, but if you really want to get into it and have a thought about these, they're helpful. One I want to touch on is the moral machine experiment. It's a really interesting experiment and raises some questions about like what we need to do as a society when we're generating these technologies. A huge experiment was done to look at how self-driving cars could be trained to respond to real life dilemmas that drivers face. What the Moral Machine experiment did is ask people from all over the world to answer a set of questions about real world driving scenarios and sort of like they were set up to test specific ethical dilemmas. So things like you're driving down the street and a woman with a stroller steps in front of your car. You can swerve to miss her, but you will either swerve into incoming traffic or you will hit a senior citizen on the sidewalk. What do you do? There's a group of children in the crosswalk, and you can't stop your car. What do you do? Like these kinds of like really difficult, hard questions. The moral experiment found that there were really significant international cultural differences between how the model would be trained if it were trained in different countries. So if you're training a self-driving car in China using Chinese morals, like recognizing that that's a really broad generalization for a large and diverse country, but just based on the trends in the data, Chinese drivers were far more likely to make driving decisions that would protect seniors than other cultures. Like they were far more likely to be respectful of elders in emergency situations. Brazil and many Latin American countries were more likely to make driving decisions that would protect women. So, if you had a choice between hitting a woman or a man, Brazil would default to saving, like protecting the woman from harm more than some other cultures would. There were other interesting facts around how people treated children, groups versus individuals. It asks some, I think, kind of interesting and troubling questions about whether, like, how you would recognize a criminal and protect them in the moment. It all raises some questions about what values AI is being taught, and whether or not those values will work for your organization and cultural context. The Compass parole automation experiment, I'm not going to go into it in as much detail, but it's an equally troubling or interesting sort of scenario where the prisons in the United States rolled out an AI model to try and assess whether or not prisoners should get parole. And the model had some trouble around equating recidivism with being Black. So it was far more likely to recommend that parole be denied to Black inmates than to inmates from other cultural backgrounds. And that's a real life thing. Like this tool wasn't in a lab. It was actually rolled out in the American prison system. So these kinds of things are a part of AI. I also would touch on if you think about conversations about representation in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, and where there's maybe still work to do on representing women, representing people from racialized communities, and making sure that career paths are open to a diverse group of individuals in STEM. That's the community that's generating these models. So there's just important conversations that you have to have about what bias looks like and do research on what testing exists, how the model's been trained, and watch it. Like be vigilant about any AI you're using to watch for that bias and edit it out if you need to. Another big piece, attribution and plagiarism. I've already touched on this, but a big problem with existing AI is that it doesn't understand copyright law in a way that it can apply to responses that it generates. That is to say that it can tell you what copyright is, but it can't consistently apply that knowledge on how to comply with intellectual property in how it's answering you. So, there are very valid criticisms from people in creative industries about this and a whole host of related issues. Um, there are definitely cases of AI developers having trained models on copyrighted content, or at least having been alleged to. And there's many lawsuits in the US, the most high profile one being between the New York Times and OpenAI, which is who created ChatGPT. I would also touch on the fact that organizations are struggling to catch up with how to attribute AI generated content. So, where those rules do exist, where a responsible AI framework has been rolled out, passing off AI generated content as human authored is unethical. But what the actual rules are for saying, like, hey, I used AI to prompt an idea, or I used AI to supplement my research, like, those rules are kind of still evolving, even in gold standards like scientific literature. Um, Post-secondaries, who are usually leaders on this because of their role in managing academic integrity and cheating, are in many cases still working out their responses, and it's a bit of an evolving field. Just a quick example to get at what I mean around, does AI understand intellectual property? This is an actual conversation I had with ChatGPT. I asked it to create an image of a man in a bat costume that does not violate DC Comics intellectual property rights. This is what it came up with. And it says, here's the image of a man in a bat themed costume designed to avoid any intellectual property conflicts. Let me know if you'd like adjustments. ChatGPT is very friendly. Um, I think that anyone who holds a Batman copyright would be take issue with the idea that this doesn't infringe their copyright. Interestingly, though, I asked this in November in preparation for a different session. I asked it again this month to see what the technology had done, and it wouldn't generate any kind of image related to a man in a bat suit for me. It kept throwing me errors that said, like, I'm sorry, I can't do that. My training prevents me from violating intellectual copyright. However, I asked it to generate an image of Godzilla, and it went right ahead and just did that for me. So these tools are not thoughtful in the way a person is around how to take what it knows and apply it across multiple uses. We've talked on it before, but I'm just going to summarize again. Accuracy. AI is more error prone than traditional software. Um, so it hallucinates, it reproduces errors and assumptions from its users or training data. So an example I use, one of the sort of display pieces that I use when I'm working with clients is AI for strategic communications, and I have it generate a press release. It can do it in a minute. It takes some really interesting tonal liberties sometimes, but it always just believes me when I tell it what organization the press release is for. And usually I'm using a totally made up organization. So, be careful about that if you're moving quickly. It's not going to catch errors any more than any other piece of software you're using is. As I kind of pointed out in the past slide with the Batman example, generative AI is still constantly evolving. And that's That's a feature, not a bug. The idea of the software is that it learns over time. So the answers that it provides changes. I would also touch on whether the trainer had the necessary expertise is important. AI only knows what its creator knew to teach. So if it was trained on data that doesn't actually reflect the subject matter expertise necessary to do whatever you're trying to get it to do, you're going to have a problem. That's part of where the bias thing shows up is this is changing, but the original sort of blast of generative AI models didn't necessarily have like good diversity, equity, and inclusion or inclusion and belonging subject matter expertise in the development teams. I don't want to like besmirch anybody. So there might have been some who buck that trend. And if so, I'd actually be happy to learn about them. But if you're doing that work that's really focused on anti-discrimination or anti-racism work or inclusion, um, AI generated content might not have the nuance or expertise that you need it to. So, uh, couple of quick examples. Here's a real example that I had of the result of asking ChatGPT, is this accurate? I asked it to generate some text about a federal program, and it made a $15 million error in its first try. I knew that the number was wrong because I had already done my research and I was just testing. So I asked it, and it did say like, "Oh, sorry, I made an error. Here's the corrected figure." But if I had been using the first draft for a grant application or a report to a funder, or in a public-facing report, there's a real risk that that error would have been introduced into my text because I might not have caught it. Another time I was doing some research on patents in Canada and I was getting frustrated with the Canadian patents database. I don't know if anybody has ever used it. It's a real challenging piece of software. I asked ChatGPT how many patents were issued in Alberta in 2024, and it confidently told me 42, which is a funny joke for anybody who's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan, but is not the correct answer. Again, I knew that was wrong, so I asked it, "How did you come up with this number?" And it admitted that it was hypothetical only after I asked it to show its math, essentially. So, a couple of interesting uses, several downsides. What do you do to mitigate risk in public sector organizational contexts? Uh, the first thing to do is don't use the tech. Um, if this is your organization's stance, you don't risk the introduction of AI introduced risks if you don't use the tool. And you don't have to figure out new processes and safeguards on the fly. It's usually practical to do this. You're not usually forced to use tools in this way, though there are definitely examples of AI being forced on users, and I unfortunately think it's going to get more common as the technology comes online, that AI is just going to appear in software you use, whether you like it or not. So you're going to have to, if you want to don't use it, you're going to have to figure out how to shut it off. Um, that said, for some organizations, AI might be the appropriate tool. You might not have other options that are low risk or affordable. You might not even know that AI is being used. And honestly, AI may help you do good things. So, telling stories anonymously by generating personas without violating the confidentiality of your clients, being more efficient, those kinds of things. Another risk management tool that I like to sort of suggest is what I call do an ick check. But basically, ask yourself, if I were a client or stakeholder, how would I feel about AI being used by my organization in this way? If you don't like the answer, um, you probably need to be careful. Or if you don't know the answer because your stakeholder environment is too complex, be careful. This exercise will also just help you identify red flags and give you some ideas about who you might need to talk to before implementing an AI solution. Some problems can be solved with consent, some can be solved with engagement, some can be solved with, and some can't. But this sort of thought exercise helps figure that out. I also recommend this tactic during the actual process of using AI. So if you are using it, look closely at what it's creating. If something doesn't feel right, trust your human instincts. The robot does not know better than you. And yeah, if it doesn't pass, either start again or use a different solution. Another strategy, which is one I typically use if I'm using AI tools, is generate but verify. So always verify what you have asked AI to do, especially if you're heading in a direction that's publication or public focused. In responsible AI frameworks, this is often referred to as having a human in the loop. Um, and yeah, this might not be, yeah, generally, if you want to use AI and want to be careful, this is a good best practice. It might not always be practical. If the subject matter is too technical or nuanced for AI to be helpful, if you don't have permissions for the data, you shouldn't be generating for giving the data to AI, you shouldn't be generating but verifying. And as I kind of mentioned, your stakeholders might have a negative reaction, especially if using AI in this way doesn't align with your organization's values. Um, Another risk mitigation strategy is if you are going to use AI, be honest. Um, that said, it might not be uh, a valid way to do this because it might just be cheaper to use the original work, both from a financial and from a reputational standpoint, um, to then worry about the legal risks. Saying we use AI, even if it is a best practice, might still damage your brand, depending on the context, depending on your stakeholders, and depending on the sort of overall public or stakeholder sentiment around these tools. And again, always be thoughtful about whether AI aligns with your organization's values. I know we're getting close to the Q&A, and I'm sure there's lots of questions, but I do want to just kind of quickly go through a thought experiment exercise around what AI deployment in nonprofits might look like. So this is a quick case study to demonstrate the kinds of issues nonprofits are going to start seeing with the use of AI. We're going to say that you're doing a raffle or a lottery of some sort, and the grand prize is a trip to Hawaii. The marketing team needs input from leadership on draft materials, including photo selection. The stock photo they want to use for the beach costs $500, but it shows a real beach in Hawaii that was taken by a human photographer who got paid. An AI generated image is free, but the beach doesn't exist, though it was probably trained on real photos. So, if your organization was faced with this scenario, what would you choose and why? Have a think about it. If you have reflections or comments to post in the chat, please feel free. I'm also curious, out of option A and option B, which photo do you think is the AI generated photo? Did AI generate option A or option B? Feel free to post your answer in the chat. Yeah, somebody points out that you could use Canva to generate a photo because you paid for the service, and in theory, they're handling the license requirements on the back end. That's a really good point. Um, Somebody says always protect your brand, pay 500 for the real picture. It's a good thought. Thank you. Somebody honestly points out, I appreciate saying the quiet part out loud. We all know that the easy ethical answer is to pay for the photo, but it is tempting to have the free option. Uh, and yeah, it's like organizations don't necessarily have clear rules, so default in favor of posting the photo. That's lots of thoughtful ideas. Okay. For the reveal, option B is the AI generated photo, and it is generated from an app literally called This Is Not a Real Beach. Option A was a photo that I took in Hawaii. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but I do want to just prompt some other questions. Does your approach change if you need multiple photos for this campaign that cost $5,000? What if no stock photo for the location that you need exists and you're going to have to hire someone at some great expense to secure a real photo? That's not a real common problem, but another example is what if you need a photo that's got people in it, and you don't have permission to use like you don't have privacy releases for any of the photos that you've got? What if you're working with an ad agency and they didn't tell you that it's AI and you don't realize until somebody points it out? And think about past relationships. If you've used a local graphic designer in the past and you've replaced them with an AI generated photo, think about what that might do and what concerns you need to be aware of. There's more thoughtful comments in the chat, asking friends and family, uh, asking someone for their own use. Think about how your organization values human effort and creativity, how that shows up in your values. These are all really great points. Last risk I want to touch on before we sort of get to the closing part of the presentation is one that I think all nonprofits are going to run into at some point, if you haven't already, which is unauthorized use by your personnel. ChatGPT has at least 180 million active weekly users worldwide. I went with a pretty low end figure, but some sources have it as high as 300 million weekly average users, and it's still growing. So lots of people are using this tool and this tool alone. For folks who were involved professionally in organizations when social media started to become online in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, you might remember this. It's the same kind of problem. What do we do about employees posting about their jobs on social media? What do we do about employees sharing content on their personal social media? This is going to have the same kind of thing. Employees are going to start looking at these tools and experimenting them. And without clear organizational guidelines, staff and volunteers may be using them to help without considering the ethical and risk management concerns that we've just kind of talked through and others besides. I will say that the line between good AI and bad AI isn't always clear in the absence of organizational guidelines, especially if you're making a decision on a snap. Like if you're under the gun, if you're up against a deadline, if you run into a problem with the annual report and it's due to the printers tomorrow, like people make decisions under different kinds of pressures, and without guidelines, there might be mistakes that will cost your organization. So, uh, if nothing else out of this presentation, I would strongly recommend just thinking about how your organization wants to proactively provide employees with those guidelines about what AI looks like in your organization to help them understand what authorized and unauthorized use looks like. Communication, I think, on that is key. Having that proactive conversation about AI and living your values before a situation like the one that I posted comes up would be really helpful, and I think is something that organizations should be considering right now. Involve staff in that conversation if you can, depending on, depends on what your organizational culture and circumstances are, but people are sort of more likely to follow rules that they understand or at least engaged on, and having actionable outcomes is really important. I would also suggest for organizations that are at sort of a higher risk of running AI type risks, update your staff code of conduct if you have one to explicitly talk about AI guidelines. This might just be editing your existing social media policy to make it a little bit more permissive, might be adding a new line. It depends on what your organization is, but I think it's really valuable to kind of get out in front of the issue and make sure your staff understand what the expectations are in your organization. Another mitigation is training. Training is also crucial. If it isn't really going to be helpful to discipline employees or volunteers for falling short of expectations that they weren't trained to meet. This is a common thing across other technologies and job skills, but it's important to keep in mind here is if somebody doesn't know that they were doing something wrong, you might have a hard time disciplining them after the fact. What training looks like will vary by organization, but make sure employees know what the rules are and who they ask for guidance. The Alberta Machine Learning, Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, has some fee for service courses that they have deployed on machine learning basics, AI governance 101. There's free resources that exist. And I've posted a Coursera one in the chat, but just trying to make sure that employees, if they are going to be expected to use these tools, understand them. That either way, they understand organizational expectations. And if AI is banned at your organization, help people understand why. And that should enhance compliance. Last couple of things. If you are considering AI adoption, and I cannot stress this enough, the first thing to consider is the tool itself and the way you intend to use it aligned with your organization's values? A couple of other questions. This is kind of the same, but different. Once you adopt the tool, what are your organization's rules for ensuring that it's used ethically? Do you have clients, stakeholders, and users who will be impacted by adopting a tool directly or indirectly? What are you going to tell them? So, a different sort of way of stating nothing about us without us, but that transparency piece is really important. Privacy law. Do you need permissions to give software access to data that you collected from your stakeholders? Are you confident that the software itself meets the privacy standards that your organization has to meet? An important thing to think about in terms of your organization's approach to AI is, do you have a choice? If AI is being rolled out in software that you use, can you turn it off? Or do you have to mitigate its use in some other way? Another thing I would say to consider is cost and pricing model, which I know everybody does because dollars are scarce, but can you afford this tool is not always an easy question to answer with AI. There's many different pricing models out there for freemium, premium subscription, and proprietary models. Some of them are pricing per user. A pricing model that's maybe not as familiar for people that's unique to AI is based on usage. If you're using APIs for other things, you might be familiar with token-based and usage-based subscriptions, but it really takes some digging to kind of wrap your head around what it's going to cost at an enterprise level to subscribe to an AI tool that has a usage-based model. Whether or not the thing even has an enterprise model. Remember, I don't know if folks were trying to grapple, like in my organization, I was working at government and nonprofits during the public health restrictions. And one of the things we really wrestled with is that we didn't use teleconference technology at all. And then when we were starting to move to webinars, we had to figure out how to get an enterprise subscription. And Zooms at the time was really difficult to navigate for an organization of our size. Another thing to think about with AI is the performance guarantee. What is the company promising this software does? Does it meet your needs? And as always, read the end user license agreement. Make sure you understand your contract with the software provider and that you're comfortable with it. I would also point out that software stability is a concern in a way that it isn't for other tools. Microsoft Word's been around for ages. The chances of Microsoft going bankrupt and not offering Word anymore are pretty low, or SharePoint. But what's the likelihood of an AI tool being canceled? And what do you do if the tool that you're using disappears? Access is also an important question. We all get those pop-ups from computers now, like, can this program have permission to access this software? Can this program have permission to access this hardware? Be thoughtful about what AI is accessing and understanding why it needs it, and if you're comfortable with that, and what the risks are to your organization. What data does the AI need? How does it access and store it? How secure is it? What could happen if the software is hacked? And related, check with your insurance provider to see if you have cybersecurity insurance, and if you do, will it cover the tool that you're thinking about adopting? And how are you going to do it ethically? Going forward, I think government and value-based organizations are going to be adopting responsible AI frameworks. Several frameworks have come out already, and I've linked to a couple of think tank resources in the toolkit, the Responsible AI Institute and the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, that talk about principles and skill building around the ethical use of AI. This is just a quick snapshot of one of the first ones to come out, which is criteria that was established by the European Commission's High-Level Expert Group, or HLEG. Love that acronym. There's more detailed information in the resources, but the basic gist is, do you have enough human oversight? Do you have standards for security, privacy, governance, and technical robustness? Like, are you going to experience downtime as a result of the tool, or are you going to get hacked as a result of the tool in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise? You are committed to privacy and data governance. You're transparent. You are monitoring for bias and preventing discrimination. The European Commission framework uses promoting environmental and social well-being. I know we didn't talk about the environmental impacts of these tools as much as maybe we could have in this presentation, but I just wanted to kind of focus on that front-end risk management stuff. And accountability. Accountability is important. Human decision makers are still accountable for the results of AI-powered work, even if the AI did it is not going to be a valid excuse for organizational leaders. So, should NPOs be adopting AI? I'm not going to answer that question. I think it really depends. You need to navigate this technology in a way that makes sense for your organization and your community. If you don't use it, tell people why so they understand and comply. If you do use it, I strongly recommend that responsible and ethical approach that involves good risk management, training, and keeping a human in the loop. And above all, the most important thing is to ensure that AI is aligned with your organization's values. If you are going to use AI, treat it like a really good summer student. It has done all the background reading. It's extremely good at what it's been trained to do, but it doesn't have any real world experience. Um, I would argue that AI can be used to save time, but not effort. It's not a substitute for human judgment and subject matter expertise. And at the end of the day, the humans in the organization are going to be accountable for what the tool produces, not the tool. So AI is here. Is your organization ready? If today's presentation sparked questions about your organization's approach to AI, let's talk. We're going to talk about in the Q&A in less than a minute. But I work with nonprofits to build custom strategies on AI and beyond that align with your mission, vision, values, and context. This includes things like presentations, facilitated conversations, and planning support to help you achieve impact in the context of a world that has these tools in them. My custom work is fee-based, but I'm happy to have short complimentary conversations with anyone to help you get started. My job is to help organizations decode complexity so that you can lead, build, and succeed. So there's been a great conversation in the chat, and I see a number of questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Scott, and we're going to move to the Q&A.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. I think opportunities, risks, considerations around AI, I think you've provided us with a number of information in that whole area. So thank you so much for that. I did see what you had a comment from Darlene. I don't know if you noticed in the chat box. Amanda, she's saying, thanks for being a thoughtful voice of reason around AI. But the first time I had a chance to chat with you when we talked about having this session, that was one of the first things I thought right away too when we had our conversation over a coffee that day. So I think that speaks volumes for, I think its value that the session has today. So certainly thank you for that. I'm just going to share my screen. We are going to start the Q&A right now. Does everybody see my screen? I think right now you should be seeing it. And what we would like to, till about 11:25, 26 or somewhere in there, if you have a question, simply type in the chat box now, and Amanda will try to answer it for you in this segment. So just simply write your question there, and we will go from there. And we'll take as many as we can to the time allows here. Okay, first one from Sandra. What is your experience with AI detection programs?
AI, okay, I'm going to be careful to be concise. AI detection programs are even newer than generative AI, so they're evolving and changing like one or two steps behind the tools they're trying to detect. I think that they can be kind of helpful, but they have a pretty high false positive rate. Uh, I know post-secondary institutions are grappling with this, and some of them have said you can't use them because they're not like they don't reach an evidentiary standard. The other thing to kind of keep in mind, which I think is interesting, maybe off topic, but I'm going to nerd out a little bit. Um, all the first round of generative AI was all trained on human generated content, so stuff that a person had written. Now we're getting to a place where people are trying to address some of the concerns we talked about by training it on what's called synthetic data. So you have an AI generate data, and then you try and use that data to train another AI. And what we're finding is that AI reacts quite badly to synthetic data some of the time, and we don't really understand why. So AI detection tools are interesting. They can help, especially if you've got a spidey sense and you put it in, like, okay. But they're not perfect, is the short answer, because they are trying to they're trying to tell the difference between synthetic data and real data. And synthetic data, like they have a hard time with synthetic data. So it's used as a supplementary resource, but I wouldn't rely on them as trusted experts.
Another question is, Amanda, what do you see as the role of AI agents developed by organizations in assisting with tasks that incorporate organizational values and mitigating risks within their industry?
That's a great question. I left AI agents out on purpose because of the just absolute explosion of them lately. I think that align with your values is still the crucial question. My company doesn't use AI agents when we're dealing with the public because we believe that like human relationship building is really core to our values and approach. Um, but I also like have the luxury of working at a fairly small firm. I know of other firms that are looking at agentic AI internally. And we're seeing it, with governments where like they're trying to be equitable and accessible to hundreds of thousands of people. I think the transformative power of agentic AI is really interesting. It is possible that as these tools become more human-like, get more refined, they could be helpful thought partners and they might help democratize democracy. That said, you have to be really careful about the sophistication of the technology. AI agents were some of the worst examples of it rolled out too fast. And like really, a good AI agent could be a really powerful tool for improving accessibility. A bad AI agent is a like front page international news disaster, not to mention really annoying and dehumanizing. So there's a balance there, but the technology is moving really, really fast on agents.
Another question here. Do you have an example of policy around AI generation for use and generative for not-for-profit organizations, or is there any something that is even some considerations that fall into that area
So I have
to develop a policy? Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Sorry. I haven't seen like a specific resource, though I might have missed it. So I didn't include a like here's a template in the toolkit. The resource that I have found most helpful so far in terms of like prompting my thinking around what those policies need to look like is the Montreal Ethics Institute. It's a pretty broad thing. Like they've been focused on advocacy to regulators to try and make sure that this tool is accessible, but it's a made in Canada think tank that talks a little bit about this. The other resource I would point out, and I think I linked them, the tool is the Association of International Privacy Professionals, AIPP, does privacy governance and AI governance. And their resource library has some stuff that's really interesting, but there is work to be done to adapt it to that policy.
Another question. Beyond the decisions around whether and how to use AI, how can an organization quantify the return on investment in AI tools, if you're looking at it from that perspective?
That's a great question. I will get back to you when the industry has an answer. Amy hosts a major conference in Edmonton every year for AI called Upper Bound. And this idea, like how do you quantify it, what the return on investment is, was a huge topic of conversation last year. The metrics are all still moving as companies grapple with it. Like sort of what I said at the front end of the presentation about how quickly adoption happened. Companies usually get a few months heads up to come up with those use cases and quantify impact. Big companies are sort of rolling with that right now. A resource I didn't include, but I could ship it to Scott and Shanaz if there's a way to update the toolkit after the fact, is Deloitte does a state of the AI ecosystem in Canada report that talks a little bit about how the private sector is doing this. So it's a helpful place to start. But if you also search Deloitte State of AI Ecosystem, the report will come up.
Question a little more general, but just I'm not sure if there's a thought or two in this one. What is a cheaper method to consistently use AI in the best ways? Is there
Hmm, that's an interesting question. I think you can use free AI tools carefully. The first thing to do is just understand what the tool is and how the data is governed. Like, so that would be my first thing is if you're looking at a tool, get a look at its privacy policy and end user license agreement to just kind of wrap your head around like what you can learn about how it was trained, how it uses and stores data, um, and what the developer thinks the tool is for. Reading the news is also not a bad way to just, like kind of just do a quick nerve search of the tool you're seeing to see if there's any big controversies. For me, the the way I kind of use free tools when I'm being careful is as I did in this presentation, where I'm really clear and upfront that I used a free AI tool and I'm using it kind of for demonstration purposes, or I have the client's consent to use AI in a particular way. So, we did some work for a client that loves AI, and we used AI to generate one of the graphics, but they knew it, and it said in the document that the graphic was AI generated. That's that's an okay way to use a free tool. Asterisks, depending on what your organization's values and stakeholder context are around those creative industries that are being negatively impacted. The other way I would use it is like the process optimization tools are fairly low risk. They're just work intensive to set up. Like if you're trying to use a free or a freemium tool to set it up in your organization, like one of those calendar tools or a time management tool, you have to do a bunch of front end work to customize it. But then, that's an internal resource that you're using with the permission of your organization. You're not really impacting stakeholders in a direct way. You're probably okay.
Couple more questions before we leave the Q&A here. Um, One of the questions was my take on AI in this presentation was focused around words written, spoken, generated, that whole piece. Does AI have applications in other processes that review data or replace a human in repetitive tasks?
Yes, it does. Um, I count this technology is not quite where I want it to be yet, but the new AI application that I am most excited for is using an AI agent to manage your calendar. So there's generative AI tools where you can kind of teach the tool when you want to basically like in my perfect universe, and people are trying to figure this out. AI can like understand sort of like when you want to book meetings and when you need to do focus time and help you auto populate your calendar. And like I get YouTube ads for these things all the time and I always click on them and I'm like, oh, this isn't quite right yet. But that kind of, you know, again, be careful about automating people out of jobs, especially if that doesn't align with your organization's values. But I think it's fair to say that like the administrative assistant and EA capacity of organizations, of nonprofit organizations is, down from where it was 30 years ago because of changes in funding and technology already. And for me, as somebody who had been an EA, I would love an AI tool that automates your calendar and makes that scheduling piece a little easier. So those kinds of tools are coming online. There's also AI tools that do filing, that do pattern recognition things. There are AI tools that do data analysis. So where you can, like if you do a survey, you can feed the survey results into an AI tool and it will spit out a report. Be careful with those tools around privacy statements. Like make sure I wouldn't take past data and feed it in to see what it is. If you're doing a survey where you're going to be using AI to analyze the data, I think it's important to be upfront about that with the client and figure out how you want to position that, and read it. Because again, like if you if the AI is like reading people's thing, it'll see patterns. It might even see patterns that you might not have seen that are really interesting and important, but sometimes it puts apples and oranges together because it's not a human. So you still need that expertise. But yes, like the short answer is like yes, there are tools out there that do things other than generate fun pictures of cats and limericks.
The final question is from Becky, and if you could just a quick response to this one, and I've heard it said too. Can you speak to the saying, if you're not paying for AI, you are the product?
I think that overstates the case a little bit, but yes, if you're not paying for AI, you are probably paying for it in terms of access to your data, where the system that you're using might be using data to train the model. So that privacy slide that I had up that talked about once AI is in a model, it's hard to get it out. It might be using it to be trained, and a lot of like some of the tools do have like shut off options, but you have to go manually shut it off, and some of them don't. So just sort of be careful about that. Um, that really understanding what the exchange is around like data for dollars is important.
Thank you, Amanda. Uh, on behalf of the community development unit today, and I'm sure all the participants you can see in the chat box, I think that the presentation is very, very well received. We can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge and learnings, related to AI for nonprofit organizations and taking the time to be with us this morning. So really, really appreciate that. You gave us important information that'll be very valuable for all of us moving forward. Risk opportunities for us in the nonprofit sector, making sure it's being used in the right situation, the right purpose. I think human judgment still is an important part of it. The hallucination part of AI, that was very interesting. I didn't understand. I did not know that before, so that was really good. The biases of AI, watching for it, the intellectual property concerns. So again, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to share all of that with us as part of this morning of learning that we've had on AI that we've experienced. It's been so good. So thank you again, Amanda, for taking the time to be with us today. Really, really appreciate that. If you haven't completed the evaluation form, keep doing it. Your information is, like I said before, is so important. I'm just going to close off the webinar right now. You can see on the screen other online webinars that are offered by our unit that this spring. All these sessions are open for registration, so we'll put the link for the session for these webinars into the chat box again. And also, I want you to be well aware of other ways to get a hold of us if you want to, through our email, through our consult line, our website, for all of our information, please do that. We'll get that information in there as well. We'll put that. Just give me two. Get that all in there right now. Here it comes. If you still were looking for that information. And also how to get a hold of us as well. You can see in that links that are in the chat box right now. So I want to again say thank you everyone for attending today, and thank you uh, for all the work that you do in your communities. We have so many more opportunities for all the work that you do out there in for the nonprofit organizations that you're a part of, for the roles that you take in those organizations. We are all the benefactors of all your hard work. So keep doing that great work. Looking forward to see you in a future webinar. And take care and bye for now. We'll have a good rest of your day.